Hi, I'm Catherine Gray, founder of She Angel Investors and co-founder of the She Angels Foundation. I'm also the podcast host of Invest in Her and an award-winning producer, author, and TEDx speaker. Our show, Invest in Her, features phenomenal female founders and funders. As you know, women receive less than 2% of venture capital funding. Our series is about accelerating the funding of women by connecting them to funding resources. Let's meet today's guest. My guest today, B Pagels-Minor, has been recognized in Silicon Valley as one of the top 40 under 40. B has created products for such renowned companies as Netflix and Apple. B, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Catherine.
You bet. I love your website. You know, on your website, you mention not only do you create products, which I want to talk about what products those are and how amazing you are. You also do executive coaching,
Yes.
keynote speaking. You are an activist. And I love on your site, you say you're a truth teller.
Yes.
I've never seen that on someone's site. And I also think, who doesn't want to do business with a truth teller?
You know, that's what I think too. It's actually really funny. I struggled with that at first because I was like, oh, this is supposed to be a business website. But the thing is how can you do good business if you don't first show people who you are? Right.
I love
and
it.
I really, truth teller is something that really feels very important to me.
I love it. And you know, when I read it, I said to myself, you just emanate that. Like when I met you, I liked you. I met you at Angels.
Yes,
which is,
Angels.
Yeah, the LGBTQ Angels group that Lorenzo Theoni is a co-founder. And, you know, when we met at that event, I'm like, I want to know this person. And I also want to share that you share in your bio that you are a trans, non-binary lesbian.
Correct.
Right. And, you know, let's explain, you know, what that means. And I know you just had a baby. You have this beautiful wife and family. So let's first get to know your background, and then let's talk about, you know, this amazing technology creations that you create for these renowned companies. And also, I really want to focus today on you being an angel investor. So, but first, a little bit about you.
Yeah. So first and foremost, I'm happy that you actually brought that up. So the first thing that we have to remember is that there's a difference between sexuality and gender, right? And so, so I was born, assigned female at birth, and because I'm also an 80s baby, it took me a long time to figure out who the heck I was. And so I first came out in college as a lesbian, right? And so what that really means is that I am attracted to other females, right?
I know what that means.
Exactly. For your guests who may not, I was like, I'm exclusively attracted to other females, but I'm also exclusively attracted to other females who also are attracted to other females, right?
Yes.
So it's a pretty exclusive club to a certain extent. But then I'm also trans, right? And so what that means is that I don't feel as though I am a woman or a man. Like I don't really identify. If I had to put it like a calculation, it would be like 52% masculine, like 48% feminine. And I do represent as a masculine of center. But if you ask my wife is a beautiful femme-looking human, but she's literally the one who wears the tool belt at home because I don't know nothing about that. Like I'm really good with making the cocktails and wearing the apron. And so what it really says is that my gender representation is outside of the norm. But I still identify as a lesbian because that's exactly who I've always been attracted to, who I've always loved. And that community, is probably one of the most important things that helped develop me, right? Coming out in college, growing up with the lesbians, softball lesbians, the bet lesbians, the Shane lesbians.
That's because you grew up in Mississippi, right?
Well, I was originally born in Mississippi, and then I went to high school in Tennessee, and then I went to college actually in North Carolina before realizing I needed to get out of the South, and so I actually ended up going to Northwestern for college in Evanston, which is right outside of Chicago, and then I lived in Chicago for the next 12 years. And so Chicago, oh my gosh, which by the way, Chicago is my favorite city in the whole world. If you've never happen in Chicago, figure out how to get to Chicago, because it's really great. But it's also a really great community. The LGBTQ community in Chicago is just really, really excellent. And so it was really, really a huge part of like my foundation. And in fact, many of my first career opportunities were primarily because I knew people from the LGBTQ community who were like, oh, go talk to this person. They're going to help you get a job, and you know, all this other type of stuff. So it was a really tremendous part of my foundation.
That's great that it's such a supportive community of helping each other. Yeah, I've heard that about Chicago. A friend of mine just made a movie about a club there that really was one of the first to I think, have a gay club in Chicago, and it's their story. I'll have to get you the name of it.
Yes.
Okay, so that's your background, that's your story. That's kind of how you ended up here in LA, getting involved in the tech world, right?
Yeah, so in 2018, I was recruited out to work at Apple. Actually, I was speaking at a conference in San Francisco called Lesbians Who Tech. I got off the stage and one of the recruiters was just like, hey, you know, you seem pretty cool. You know, have you ever considered working at Apple? I was like, who hasn't considered working at Apple?
Hello.
Right, especially if you work in tech. And so they recruited me to the Bay Area. We moved to Los Gatos. I do not recommend, if you're under a certain age, moving to Los Gatos as your first step, by the way. It closes at 10. That was not a good situation for us. As,
That's
you know,
Beverly Hills, too.
Exactly. I know, but I was like, this is the most money we've ever made, and we're pretty young, and we don't have anywhere to go to spend our money.
Wow.
This is a problem. Yeah, so this is the whole situation. But working at Apple is great. So I worked on the App Store, specifically a product called App Store Connect. So App Store Connect is essentially the portal that every single developer has to submit their app through in order for it to actually appear in the App Store.
Wow.
And so it's really like the heart of the App Store.
Yeah.
And it was really great though, because then I got all this exposure, right? You know, because, you know, my customers was anyone who's ever considered making an app. So that's everyone from EA, you know, Microsoft, Google, to, you know, the kid in Ethiopia who decides to just create an app because they want to track water, right? And so one of the cool things about that role, and I think was a transformational point for me, is that I realized every single day when we made decisions, we were creating an opportunity for people to have life-changing, life-altering financial windfalls, right?
Oh my God, that's so cool.
And it really was cool. And so like it really became like a badge of honor. I think actually if you think about most of the people who are behind the App Store, we really recognize that. We really recognize the fact that we changed lives with the App Store. And so it really kind of changes your whole perspective on scale too. Because also when I would submit, you know, when we would create something and it would go out there in the world, you know, millions of people just on the developer side would see it. And then on the flip side, on the consumer side, billions of people would be looking at this new thing that you've added. And so it's really, really incredible.
Wait, did that impact you wanting to invest in companies?
A little bit. So there's two things about the Apple thing. So one, it was the most money we'd ever made. And I was just like, wait, so we actually have disposable income here. Like, how do we actually reinvest this, right? So my wife and I both really believe in doing transformative work, right?
Yes.
And so what that means is that it's like part of that's charitable, right? You know, so like we founded a scholarship at my university, Northwestern University, to help Black women, and that's the WMXN. So basically I just didn't want anyone who had my similar background to ever struggle to go to college.
Right.
And so,
wait, and how do people find that? What is
so the name of the scholarship is the Susie A. Franklin Scholarship, and it's at Northwestern University. And actually, if anyone wants to donate to scholarships at Northwestern, you actually can donate to our scholarship too. But it's really, really great.
And why that name?
So that's my mother's name. So my mother, so my mother, unfortunately, she passed away in 2012 from a very minor disease. But, you know, again, this is why healthcare is so important. You know, she went to a hospital for sore throat and she didn't make it out.
Oh my gosh.
And so it's been one of the privileges of my life is trying to tell people about her story. And so in fact, with the scholarship, one of the first things I asked them, I was like, can I write a note to every scholarship recipient to let them know who the person is that they're getting the scholarship from and how important she was, so that her name never really goes away.
I want to cry. That's such a beautiful story.
Yeah, you know, it's really great. You know, it's really great being able to honor the people who deserve it, right?
Yeah.
You know, sometimes people think about celebrities and they're like, oh, well, celebrities are... No, that's actually not. It's usually everyday people who really create tremendous impact and change. And I think that's part of the story.
And one thing I want to say is, you know, I love that you invest in for-profit and nonprofit, because most women will invest in nonprofit, but not for-profit.
Correct.
And so I'm glad you're doing both, and that you're making a point here that it is important to do both.
Yes.
And we are underrepresented in both of those arenas. In nonprofit, we get less than 2.6% for women and girls causes. In for-profit, in the venture capital world, we get less than 2%. So it's so important that women and LGBTQ and BIPOC, all people that are the underserved communities, start investing in their own people. And I love that that's what you do.
Yeah, and that's how you do transformation work, right? You know, because so there's two things. Obviously, the nonprofit's really important because you're creating this layer of security, right? That you're creating this opportunity for individuals who wouldn't have that opportunity.
Right.
So that's a really great investment just naturally. Like I think about it when I donate to my local community, I'm creating excellence, and that excellence hopefully will pay back off, right? Like over time.
Yes.
But then when you think about it from a for-profit perspective, there's two things there. So one, you need to create economic viability for yourself, right? And I think that's what people are always like, I can survive. It's like, no, why are you just surviving?
Right.
Right? Like you could do more than survive. You can create a windfall to yourself that allows you to do more of this transformation work, right? And then also be healthy and happy, right? Healthy and happy people create more success, right?
Absolutely.
And so it's a self-fulfilling prophecy when you invest in that way. And then secondly, obviously from a for-profit perspective, you can go out and find the companies that you're most passionate about that other people may not be nearly as passionate about.
Right.
And so as a result, you end up with creating, again, more of this positive transformational change with these for-profit companies too.
Right.
So it's all about this cyclical effect that you can actually create by looking at both sides of this puzzle.
Right. And it's so important that your message get out to our LGBTQ community, to people of color, to women in general, because we are the ones that have not been investing in for-profit. And investing in our own kind is what's going to provide more funding, but also more wealth. And I'm glad you brought that up. You know, you had shared with me that you and your wife put a certain percentage of your income into this investing as an angel investor or as a limited partner in a venture capital fund to build your wealth. But at the same time, we're doing good. We're helping people. What kinds of things have you invested in?
Yeah, so I'm really across all over the board, right? Because I'm just a curious person.
Yes.
So for me,
too.
like my biggest thesis is, it's just, does this solve something real in the world, right?
Yeah.
Like, does this solve something that's important, that's actually going to create some positive change, right?
Right.
So I've done everything from, aeronautical companies to space companies to, companies that are trying to solve like process issues, operations type things. And so, we probably have 40 or 50 investments. And if you looked at our portfolio, you would just go and you would say, I really don't understand what B is trying to do. And so you actually start drilling down in these companies. You're like, every single one of these companies does something really awesome for the world, right?
Yeah.
They solve some really simple problem that, I was just like, oh my gosh, it's like, why didn't I think of this idea?
Right.
And so it's just been really, really great kind of going through this process and kind of investing in different people. And by contrast, for instance, I haven't invested in nearly as much blockchain, right? Because I don't think that there's enough clear use cases for it that are like that makes sense to me, that I'm saying this is sustainable for 5, 10, 15 or 20 years.
Right.
So like that's kind of how like my thesis is like especially as a product manager, when I one of the really interesting things about being when you interview for product manager roles is that they always ask you to do some kind of like product sense type thing. So it's like take some really big problem and try to figure out how you would solve it. Right. And so whenever I look at these companies, I'm always just like, you did not pass the interview question. I was like, I don't think this is how you solve this problem. So if you can't pass the question, then I can't invest in you.
Well, that's interesting. And I just want to always use this platform to encourage more atypical investors to invest, which would be women, LGBTQ, BIPOC, women of color, people of color. We're lacking in that. That's why we're not getting the funding, is because we're not recognizing ourselves at the table. Mm-hmm. And so I like your messaging about that you're actually doing it. And by doing it, you encourage others too. Yep. And I like that you take a certain percentage of your income and say, I'm going to invest this in that arena of angel investing, because I think so many people in those categories, women, LGBTQ, people of color, often will put money into the stock market or bonds or real estate, but they don't realize what an incredible opportunity it is over here in the investment world. And that's really what I try to do every week, is pull back the curtain and say there's a whole investment world out there that you need to know about, that you can be part of. You could go to an angel group and learn about investing. And that is another question I had for you. When you decided to step into that arena of angel investing, how did you feel confident enough to know what you were doing? Did you join an angel group? Did you have some friends that were angels? Like, what was that path?
Yeah, so first I started off, I started off asking some friends, it's just like, how do you actually invest? Like, literally, that was my first question.
Yeah.
It was like, I don't really understand how you actually invest. And so then they were like, there's these groups, so like, Gay Angels is an example.
Yes.
I'm also a part of a group called the Purple Arch Fund, which is Northwestern's venture fund. Well, it's a venture fund associated with Northwestern alumni. I was like, because Northwestern does not have a venture fund.
I've noticed that most universities, just to interject, have their own alumni venture funds now.
Exactly.
I know my alma mater does too.
Well,
so that's a good place for people to start.
And it's not only just like, university alumni, but also alums of like groups of friends. It's Airbnb has a venture group, right? The Airbnb alums. So there's a lot of different ones that you actually probably are just in your local community that actually do a lot of venture investing. There's also like AngelList Ventures, which has also been really great because you can kind of see lots of different types of deals, and then you can also reach out to people who have syndicates. So syndicates are usually like one, but less than like 10 people usually. People who've come together and they have access to deals, and then they provide access to those deals to people who are kind of out there in the world type of thing. And so it started off with talking to those folks, and then they provided this list of names, and I actually started talking to those folks. For instance, I applied to Angels, and then I asked them lots of questions, and then you actually start seeing, once you become a member or you get access to this information, what's really great is that a lot of them have lots of data points that they provide to you, they share with you. They give you lots of context on why a deal is good or why a deal is not good. So it starts to starts changing your brain, because you start looking at these like fundamental things that they say, oh, well, this is really good. And you're like, oh, okay, I didn't realize that that's such an important factor when thinking about an investment. And so that's really part of it. It's like most of these, there's a lot of these good syndicates that are really good about like being very kind and educating you. And so you have to find that too. So I would really highly suggest looking for the ones that really have an educational component to their work too.
Absolutely, because there are so many things. I think that's the reason people don't do it, is because they don't understand it. Nobody wants to jump into something they don't understand, and they have to realize that it's more than, hey, do I like this product? Like, I think a lot of people jump in and say, oh, there's no way this product isn't going to be a home run, but you're not looking at all the other variables, like who is the team, how much funding do they have, how much experience do they have, what connections do they have, what business do they have already. I think a lot of times people just get caught up, and then they make a mistake, and then they lose money, and then they go, oh, you can't make money doing that. So it's important to do it the right way. But now there's so many tools and opportunities out there, like you said, that have that educational component. So I'm so glad you brought that up, because I want to encourage people every week to look into the possibility of becoming an angel investor or limited partner in a venture capital fund. That's really what's going to move the needle of why women, LGBTQ, and people of color get less than 2% of all the funding right now. So wrong. Hello. Let's change it. We can change it, right? Yes. It takes us. Nobody's going to fix it. We have to be proactive. Yeah.
Well, and I think, just like, so one that made me think of two things. So first, you talked about this fear of like losing, right? So first and foremost, if you've invested in the stock market over the last few months, these last few months have been terrifying, right? So we know that there's no such thing as a sure thing. Right. The only sure thing is that we're going to pay taxes, right? That's the only thing that we know for a fact.
Death and taxes.
So first and foremost, I think that's something to keep in mind. And so this is why this has to be a practice. And that's why I stick to a certain percentage, because if you do it over time, it's just like any stock. It's just like any, real estate. You may have, 3 to 4 lemons, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But that fifth one, holy crap. that
Yes.
could be really, really epic.
Right. And you could make way more money than you could in the stock market.
Yes, you could.
Yeah, you're
Yes.
on the ground floor of a company
Exactly.
that becomes a unicorn, 50 times return or more.
Exactly. So and so all of this is about patience,
Yeah.
right? So it's
Yes.
about patience. It's about getting smarter as you do it. It's about, as you, so for instance, like my wife and I are debt free now. And so like, for instance, that completely changes the trajectory of how we think about investing,
Yes,
right? Because all
yes.
of a sudden, we start off, like, just for context also for folks, our first few angel investments were like $500 or $1,000, right? And so then it eventually became more because we had more income over time. So also, like, I think the other thing is, don't be intimidated by thinking that it has to be this large amount. Like, you're not going to be the biggest check that any company gets, most likely, right? If you're an individual, the biggest check is going to be from one of those really big, venture companies or something like that. What you're doing is augmenting that puzzle for them and helping them get them a little bit further with what you're doing as an angel investor. And I think when you think about that, it takes a little bit of the burden off of you, because it's like, you're the helper, you're not the big bat, right? And as the helper, you can help not only with financial funds, but depending on how the situation works, you might also become someone who becomes a consultant for that company too. And I think that's the thing that I've really liked, is being able to actually be available to the companies that I've invested in and actually have some actual relationships and provide a little bit of my context and like my experience to kind of help them build a better product, because that's like, and the cool thing about that is it also is a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? It's like, if I can help them be more successful, then that means that my investment is more likely to come through.
Yeah.
So it's also, I'm playing both sides. I have a little thumb on the scale to try to even out my investment returns.
And I have to say, if a technology company or whatever has you as an investor, and you're so revered in Silicon Valley, how lucky are they? Yeah. And I always tell that to those seeking funding, is that it's not always about just getting the money. It's about getting that person, that investor's mentorship, expertise, connections. That's what makes the investment exceptionally valuable. I'd be remiss if I didn't circle back to Netflix, because
Yes.
you've been involved with Netflix. Tell us what you did for them.
Yeah. So when I first was at Netflix, I was a data product manager. So I built out all of the membership and finance data products. So think about it as, they're the CFO. When the CFO is trying to figure out how much revenue the company actually made, how much revenue the company is going to have, those are types of things that we kind of figured out. Tax authorities, making sure that we know exactly how much tax we need to pay, being compliant, and then also, really, one of the things that I was really excited about is this idea of kind of changing it from this conversation of how much money we're going to make to how much money should we be making in order to support the content slate that Netflix wants to produce over time. So it was a really cool job. And then the second half, I actually worked on the gaming team. So Netflix has gaming. I know some people don't know, because it's still kind of in its beginning stages. But helping to build out and think through all of the systems needed to launch games on Netflix, as well as the various mobile platforms as well.
Cool. Well, hey, thanks so much for sharing your insight, your wisdom. I so appreciate having you on the show. How can people reach you, B?
Yeah, so first and foremost, I have to thank my wife, because Pagels was her last name. So I'm literally the only B Pagels-Minor in the world. I was not the only B minor, which was interesting, but I am the only B Pagels-Minor in the world. So Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, all those places are really great. If you want to talk professional stuff, I would suggest LinkedIn, because I usually think professional things when I go to LinkedIn. If you want to shoot the shit, which I'm perfectly fine with, and talk about silly things, including the fact that a 7-month-old boy is very complicated and just likes to smack the heck out of me, you can catch me on Twitter. And again, it's B Pagels-Minor everywhere in the world.
And I'm glad you did the pronunciation, because we had that conversation this morning. I didn't know if it was Pagels. You told me one time somebody said Pagels-Minor, and you're like, no, we're not that fancy.
Yes.
So it is B Pagels-Minor. You can find them on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook. Facebook?
I do have
okay.
Facebook too. Yes.
And of course, you can find She Angel Investors also on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and me, Catherine Gray, Invest in Her on Instagram as well as my LinkedIn. We really appreciate you tuning in, and hope that you've gotten some golden nuggets to take along your way as far as investing in other companies, especially underserved communities that are founders with game-changing ideas that are going to impact the planet, and they can only do it with funding, and also encouraging the founders out there with great ideas to seek the funding through these new funds that are popping up that are created by LGBT community and by women founders and people of color. More and more of those funds are popping up, giving all of us opportunities in that arena. Thank you so much for tuning in. Make it a great week. Thank you, B, for being an amazing guest. Remember, if you're looking to launch a business or grow your business, check out our e-course, 6 Ways to Fund Your Business, available at She Angel Investors.